thing that was so interesting is because we, again, didn't want to risk anyone knowing and tipping our hand. The officers thought they were coming in at 5 o'clock in the morning to prepare for an early morning parade. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of disgruntled cops sitting in that room when we got together for the briefing the next morning. But as we laid out the case and started showing them photographs of the homes that we were going to hit, and put together the plan of who and what teams were going to hit which homes, you could see the interest level just increasing. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, while our hope was that most of the polygamy cult members were asleep, we raided the homes, and within a matter of about 30 seconds, we had all of the homes secured, and it just went off flawlessly.
And when you said that they thought they were coming in for a parade?
Yeah. In fact, one of the chapters, I call it, "This is no parade duty," because that's one of the comments I heard from the cops when the police chief walked in and said, "Okay, here's what we're doing this morning, guys." And one leaned over and goes, "This is no parade duty."
Yeah, but the thing is, you're familiar with like New York City the Thanksgiving Day parade, like the night before all the cops get drunk, you know? So you weren't worried that they would come in drunk that day for the parade?
No, we weren't worried about that at all. They were in ship shape and ready to go.
Now, this happened years after Waco, right? So you must be concerned about that kind of thing too, right?
No, it's actually before Waco.
Oh, it was before Waco. Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, just a few years before Waco. Yeah.
Okay, so how many people go to jail?
So initially, in fact, let me talk about the raid for a moment, because it was pretty amazing. When we got inside, the radio just lit up with chatter as the officers started describing the things that they were finding. And of course, we want folks to read the book, but it was absolutely incredible. The stuff that fit this doomsday mentality. The officers were recovering large amounts of material that was written about this thing they called the sexual way of life, which was the doctrine used to train the children. They were recovering the semi-automatic weapons that were hidden in doorways and in floors. In fact, at one point I was sitting on the floor in one bedroom with a map that my witness had drawn for me, and she said, "There are weapons right here," and I couldn't see a thing. We had torn the room apart, and I was sitting in the corner just staring, and I was unconsciously pulling on the carpet, and I felt the carpet give way. And the actual floor of the carpeting was Velcroed down. As I pulled it back, panels started opening up, exposing fully loaded Mini 14 assault rifles. And so we realized that the potential for problems were there. Every home was alarmed and interconnected so that they could communicate and set off alarms if someone were to come in, and many of the homes had bars on the doors in the basements and other kinds of things, further fortifying them. So it then became a evidence collection challenge that took most of the day.
Was there any resistance, armed resistance?
No, believe it or not, I mean, I like to credit it to the amazing work of the police officers. We hit front and back doors simultaneously. We were able to get inside and quickly gain control. Most of the people were arrested in their beds, and detained in their beds. At that time, I only had an arrest warrant for the prophet of the group. And we had pickup orders on the children to take them into protective custody. The prophet, self-proclaimed prophet of the group, was nowhere to be found, and so we actually made 0 arrests on day one, but we took the children into custody and, of course, collected the evidence. And then over the course of several days, we had just opened the first Children's Justice Center in the state of Utah, third in the country, a center where forensic interviews can take place with children of sexual or physical assault. And we started this process of interviewing the children. It was only a matter of about 4 days until the leader turned himself in. Now, just before that, I had arrested the two men who had been having sex with the kids outside of the cult. They weren't cult members, that I talked about earlier. And so we were starting to chip away, but it wasn't until the leader confessed that the cards all started to fall.
Okay, so the leader confesses. He doesn't go to trial?
So amazingly, the leader turned himself in 300 miles away to a small local city jail, and they called me, and so we jumped in. At that time, I was driving a Camaro with T-tops that we had taken from some drug traffickers in a seizure, and so that was my police car. We used that sports car's capability to get that 300 miles between us pretty quickly, and we went in, and the first words out of his mouth was that he wanted his attorney. And so we were completely shut down and somewhat deflated, but we had pre-planned that would happen. And so we put our secondary plan into motion, and of course you can read more about that in the book. But by the time we had made it about 3/4 of the way back to Ogden with this person in custody, he had fired his attorney and was demanding to share his opinion of what was going on. And over the course of the interview, which lasted several hours and into the early morning hours, he confessed to sexually assaulting the children. That then led to a number of, not only the initial hearing, but the preliminary hearing. And then when he got to trial, he pled guilty rather than face additional charges, which we were prepared to bring. But in the meantime, we then started interviewing all of the other people that we had cases on, and one by one, they all confessed, except for a couple. In the end, all of them pled guilty to the charges and were sentenced.
Incredible. So he turned himself in without his attorney in some small podunk jail. He must have had a plan there, and then fires his attorney away home. And then he was confessing, saying, "Hey, let me tell you, I'm really God. This is we're doing the right thing here." He was trying to convince you.
Actually, he was trying to convince us of what his belief system was,
right,
and justify what he did. Yeah, it was pretty disgusting.
Oh, fascinating, just fascinating. Okay, now what about how many other guys were arrested, convicted?
We had a total of 13 people that we charged. One of those, a 6-year-old child, was unable to testify in the preliminary hearing. We were in the middle of the trial, and the child just, back in those days, we allowed defense attorneys to cross-examine children in a preliminary hearing, and they could badger and just destroy these little children. And this is what happened in this particular case, and so we withdrew that case rather than put that child through it again. But the rest, we had older children, not 6-year-olds, but we had 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids who got up and testified, and so the remaining 12 were all convicted.
How many, besides the ones you didn't charge, how many do you think got away that we should be concerned about? Well,
we had enough cases to file enough information to file additional charges. We actually went for 2 years, Ed, in those trials on the 12 people that were convicted. And we could have kept going, but we made a conscious decision that at what point do we quit punishing these child victims who are being forced to testify, and we made a conscious decision to stop. There were multiple people that could have been charged, and we've often wondered if they should have been charged, but we have to just err on the side that we looked at the victim first. I don't believe there have been any of those offenders who ever have been charged with reoffending, so I don't know the status of that. And that, of course, is one of the one of the heartaches of this case 30 years later is to look at it and say, what could we have done better? And that may have been one of those areas that we should have persevered in, but we chose not to.
Gotcha. Now, I know you've established a relationship with a lot of the young children victims over the course of their life.
Yeah, actually, I didn't have anything to do with them after the case. I purposely chose not to. It was very painful for me as well, and I think that's a point that I'd like the listeners to realize is that these cases are really difficult on investigators as well. And while I would never want to minimize what the victim themselves went through, there's collateral damage and lots of things that you just can never get out of your mind when you handle a case like this. I had planned on never talking about this case again, but about 2 years ago, I received an email, and then 2 weeks later, a second email, unorchestrated, from two of the victims who said, it's been 28 years and I'm still not over this, and I need someone to talk to. Can you help me? And after some thought, Ed, I wrote them both an email and said, best wishes in your futures, and I don't know that there's anything I could do to help you. And I've just, as gently as I could, let them down and said, I'm not interested in helping. Well, I could not get over that. Mm-hmm. I could not get these children out of my mind. At about that same time, the prosecutor in the case reached out and said, the State Victims Council would like a recap of the case 30 years later. Would you do it? And I told him, no, I won't. I don't want to deal with it. And I had kept the case up on a file or a shelf in my basement for 30 years. And every time I'd look at it, I'd think I'm going to burn that thing. Well, I didn't burn it one more time. And about, a year later, we were facing January, February of 2020. And I thought, who am I to tell these children what they need or don't need? These 10-year-old kids are now in their 40s that were victims then. And so I decided I'd reach out to them. And so I contacted as many as I could, and 9 of them responded back. And after 30 years, they hadn't seen each other in that entire time. And so I arranged for a Zoom call, and in June of this year, brought them onto a Zoom call to chat for a moment. We talked. They wanted the book written. Of course, I had written this book 10 times over the last 30 years, Ed, and I kept putting the manuscript away, thinking it just is not a story that should be told. And when the kids said, I need it done, and I keep calling these beautiful adult women kids because that's what they are in my mind, I thought, who am I to make that decision? And so I decided to pull it all out, and I started interviewing the kids and learned the places where we had really failed them, like continued counseling and getting an education and having a support system, and went about working on how to rectify that. And that is part of what the book talks about, is what we did after 30 years to try to help these kids get along. And then, of course, Dr. Phil heard about it, and I had done some other work for the good doc, and he brought me on his show, and for the first time in 30 years, I got to see their beautiful faces.
Wow, fascinating. That's just fact. Just think they grew up together, and then they don't see each other. We went through the same trauma, and then don't see each other for 30 years. Mike King, we're out of time, man. We got 2 minutes. What do you want to leave us with?
Just that, sadly, abuse happens. It's a story that should never have to be told. But, I think as uncomfortable as it is, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be told. And this book is one of those kinds of stories. It chronicles my investigation. And for us to ignore, avoid, or pretend that these kind of events don't occur, Ed, is just simply not helpful to victims, potential victims, or society in general. It's about transparency and awareness. I hope that people will go. The book will start shipping in January, and I hope they'll go to the website, profilingevil.com, and order it. And I would just be so honored to have him share this story.
And don't forget the YouTube channel too, Profiling Evil, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. Mike King.